Honorable Prime Minister, distinguished guests, good morning to everyone. Thank you so much for this kind of invitation to join in Luxembourg for this important summit. This morning, I had the pleasure of listening to many wonderful presentations on fintech, and for the next 15-20 minutes, I'll take you one level up. This is not really a presentation on fintech per se, but much more about technology and its impact on society, on businesses in the world around us. A lot of the data I'll use in my presentation is based on my own research that I've been conducting for the last, I would say, 20 years. Most of it at the World Economic Forum in the form of the report called the Global Information Technology Report, in which we have a very formal model of assessing a country's competitiveness in technology. We publish it every year. And as you can see in the most recent rankings of the most competitive countries in technology, Luxembourg does very well. Luxembourg is ranked number 9, so it's pretty high up in the list. So I will not really go through the report per se, but just take a few key points from there to highlight 3 important messages. The first important message really is about the importance of leadership in creating vibrant digital innovation ecosystems. The second important message is about what really creates and differentiates the winners from others. So what are some of the leading economies doing better than others? And the third one is much more as a message of caution. Despite all the hype and all the progress we see, the digital divide around us actually is growing, not shrinking, and that's a cause of concern for us. So I'll talk a little bit about that in some detail. So let's focus on the first one, about the necessity for creating vibrant digital innovation ecosystems. To give you a short story, let me sort of move back to 2009 when we had this global financial crisis. In New York City, Mayor Bloomberg had this realization that the city had missed the technology innovation completely or to a large degree. So he really wanted to bring in technology innovation into the city. So in a very typical American fashion, he held a global competition. He said that, well, I want to invite a major technology university to come and establish itself inside the city. And I will make sure the city supports it with land and other resources. There's a global competition. A number of universities around the world competed for it. The 2 finalists were Stanford and Cornell, and in 2011, Cornell won the competition. Now, what really has been happening since then is the city has given half of Roosevelt Island. Some of you have probably visited the island. There's a cable car that takes you there on the East River. And that half is 13 acres of land in Midtown Manhattan, a piece of land worth more than $500 million. And Cornell is now creating this unique innovation ecosystem out there by building in some of the best researchers to be based out there, by having a partnership for the first time with a very strong foreign university, Technion, which is very strong in technology entrepreneurship, and by inviting companies to come and set up physical offices with employees at the same location. There's a real integration of technology, computer science, and business on the island, inside the university. The roles of faculty members have changed also dramatically out there. Faculty for the first time at Cornell Tech are being required by contract to in fact teach in the local middle schools. Why? Because this is much more than just a project to set up a university in New York City. This is really a unique partnership across a major technology university, the city government, the private sector, and civil society to transform the economy of one of the most important and dynamic cities in the world. Now, what is a brief lesson from this? The lesson from this really is that even in New York City, a city that is very dynamic, very global, very active, the leadership feels the need to continually transform itself and be with the leading changes in technology. Such kind of leadership is very important for regions, for cities to in fact keep on being there at the leading edge. In the US right now, Cornell Tech is the most important project in higher education happening right now in the country. In July 2017, this campus is opening in Roosevelt Island, and I can tell you that it will not only change the skyline of Manhattan, the east side, but really it is very much an experiment, a very bold experiment to try and see, can we embed an innovation ecosystem inside the heart of a dynamic, thriving city? And many cities and many smaller countries around the world are looking at this experiment very carefully to see, can they learn from it, can they emulate it? Now, the second message really is about what are some of the differences between countries that use technology well, compete well with technology, and those that don't. Now, as I told you, we have been studying, as part of the Global IT Report series of the World Economic Forum, how different economies have been performing at different times over the last 15 years or more. And based on this long piece of data that we have, we're able to analyze how trends have changed over time. One thing which is very evident right now is the capacity for digital innovation around the world is increasing. That's your red line in this graph out here. So look at the red line, and you see that it doesn't matter which region of the world you're looking at, the capacity for digital innovation is increasing in all parts of the world, which is good news. In a sense, what is happening is technology getting embedded in society, in business, all over the world. Now, the interesting question out here is, can we identify differences in the way some countries are adopting technology and some companies are using technology as they move forward? Now, we have been looking at data, and if you look at, for example, the high-income economies and the low-income economies, you see a very interesting set of differences. You see that typically, among the low-income economies, the economies that do better than their peers are the ones that invest more in institutions, creating high-quality institutions, and in creating and investing in high-quality human talent. So those are the two important differentiators if you look at what makes the difference between low-income economies that perform better and the high-income economies. And that is fairly intuitive. It sort of makes sense. It's sort of natural. If you look at the high-income economies, and Luxembourg certainly is in that category, and you ask the question, what really is the difference between those high-income economies that do better than others? Because almost all the high-income economies, they have in general good institutions, they have in general good human talent, they invest in human talent, but what does that make the difference between those that perform well and those that don't perform as well? And our research shows that the key difference, it really is the degree to which the business sector in these high-income economies have adopted digital technologies and really embraced them in a very deep, fundamental sense. Now, in our research, we found these 7 economies. On the right-hand side, you see Finland, Switzerland, Sweden, Israel, Singapore, Holland, USA, that stand out. That's the top line out there. And you can see the difference between them and the rest. And what is interesting and important out here to keep in mind is that it is not just a question of using e-commerce or putting in SAP systems or using technology inside the organization, which most companies are doing in these economies, but it is much more a question of changing the fundamental mindset inside the organizations. In many of the presentations we heard today of FinTech, you heard about how different financial organizations have to rethink the world around them. And a very simple comparison point for us is think about a young adult, a child in your family, a nephew, niece, someone young that you know. Think about the kind of world that this person is growing up in. For this young adult, the world today is really a world that is fundamentally global. You go online, you access the world. Fundamentally open. There are very few barriers in access. There are barriers, but very few barriers in access compared to before. Very much real time. Very much interactive. and much more transparent than what probably we experienced growing up when we were young at the same age. You put those labels together, global, open, real-time, interactive, transparent, and you transpose them to the business world. What does your business look like if those attributes start entering into your business fundamentally in a very deep sense? And to the reality is that most of our businesses are not designed for that kind of a world. Maybe they're doing better on some dimension as opposed to others, but in general, our businesses are not yet there in that kind of a real-time mindset that is very inherent in the digital environment we live in today. I can talk about the Internet of Things, the data importance of data analysis and data mining and all these other kinds of important issues, but real fundamental challenge out here is that businesses have to really change the mindset to embrace the digital age around us, and societies and economies where we see that happening better tend to be performing better on the digital dimensions today. The third message really in digital divide. Now, all of us know today that mobile phones, there are as many mobile phones as the population of the world, and we tend to think that just because the mobile phones is pretty accessible all around the world, the digital divide has collapsed and basically, everyone is having access to the same technologies. But the reality is that the data shows the digital divide, in fact, is increasing, and that's a very important point. It's not decreasing, it's increasing right now. Increasing, why? Because just having access to a mobile phone doesn't actually mean you have access to the same kind of functionality. Access to internet, the kind of speed of internet, access to digital resource, digital content, all these elements are extremely important, and what you're finding is that as you look at the low-income economies, access to these higher value-adding elements of the digital world is actually progressing at a much slower pace than the high-income economies, the richer world. And in fact, if the pace of progress of just a very simple dimension like access to internet keeps on going at the same rate as it went in the 2010-2013 time period, it will take us more than 30 years for the poor income economies to in fact rise to the level close to the high income economies. And those 30 years, you can believe it, the high income economies have jumped and moved forward to the next level of technology. So technology gap is increasing around the world, and this is a very disturbing challenge for us from a policy point of view. How do we actually handle the policy point of view? And also what you see is that there is another very interesting kind of challenge we are facing today. And in these sort of three graphs, look at the red line. The red line looks at the individual usage, so how much are individuals using technology. The blue line talks about how our business is using technology, and the green line talks about how our government's using technology. Now reflect back to a world maybe 20 years ago or 30 years ago. Typically 20, 25 years ago, if you wanted to get things done technology, you went to the office because the office had more powerful technology infrastructure. Today, what situation? Today, it is often easier for us as individuals to do the kind of work we want to do at home with the kind of infrastructure we have at home as opposed to the office. And this is a very small symptom of what is happening right now around us, is that in general, individuals are using technology and adopting it at a faster pace than governments and businesses. And governments and businesses are in fact falling behind on many important dimensions. Take a very simple example like communication. Today we all use, in companies and governments, email is very frequently the standard of communication. Look at young people around us, how many of them rely on email as a primary communication mechanism? They use other kinds of instant messaging, other kinds of mechanisms, and our entire corporate infrastructure is behind that time, and it's just unable to in fact keep up with the change. And this sort of trend line that you see is very interesting. You see the red line, the individual usage going up. You see the green line and the blue line pretty stagnant, or in fact growing up at a much slower pace. So what this is doing is it is creating enormous pressures in the world around us. if you superimpose on this the rate of technology progress, so we all know technology is progressing exponentially. That is happening, will continue for a pretty long time. But you superimpose on that and you look at the rate at which individuals are using technology, and even more the rate at which our organizations, firms, and governments are able to change. And what you see is that gap is growing, it's not shrinking. So this, in fact, causes tremendous stresses on governments, on firms, to keep up with both technology progress and to keep up with the rate at which citizens and the customers are adopting technology. And this is creating this constant pressure inside organizations to close the gap, but the gap is in fact increasing, not decreasing. So really, I think what is very important out here is our ability to change as organizations, as governments, is limited and is going to be a critical blocking factor for the future. So let me just conclude with the three messages out here. The first one was around the importance of creating vibrant digital ecosystems. For that, leadership from the very top is essential. The second message was around what actually makes a difference between economies that perform better than others. And in the high-income group, what our research shows is the degree to which the business sector embraces digital technologies in a real fundamental sense is the critical differentiator. For that, as I tried to give example with the young child sort of outlook of the world, the key issue is how do you change the mindset of executives of the entire body of the company to rethink the business fundamentally. And the third one is a more sobering message that the divides out here in technology are in fact growing, they're not shrinking. And the divides are multiple across countries, across regions in a country, across the pace of adoption of technology by individuals and by governments and by firms. And those pressures are going to be very serious pressures on us and not going to decrease in the future going forward. So thank you so much for giving me your attention for these few minutes. I hope I could convey a few messages from my research and set the context of technology used inside society and our firms at large today. If you have any comments or questions, happy to take them, of course, from my email address. Thank you so much.